Are we recording? Yes, we are. Hello. Okay, so, yeah, I've had a few computer problems. Yes, so that's why I'm a little bit late putting a video up. But anyway, I'm scanning through one or two of the fresh videos on YouTube from some of the wonderful superstars of photography. Yes, I noticed that, ISO invariance has sort of started to crop up again. And what is ISO invariance? Well, basically you have to think of ISO as not being part of the exposure triangle. Anybody who tells you that ISO changes the sensitivity of your sensor is an arsehole and an idiot. It doesn't. It used to do on film, yes, because we used to buy film of different sensitivities, and those sensitivities were either specified as ISO, ASA, or DIN or DIN. Okay, and the DIN scale was a logarithmic scale, and it sort of makes a lot of sense when you get into the nuances of exactly what ISO settings do for digital cameras, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. But suffice to say that ISO should actually be called gain, and all we're doing is turning the gain of the overall sensor signal. All we're doing is turning it up after the image has been taken. All your digital cameras have a base ISO, and the base ISO never changes. And even if you specify you are taking a picture at 1000 ISO, all that happens is the picture is taken at 100 ISO, and then the AD converter and SNR firmware algorithms then turn the gain up until they get a decent picture. They get the levels where they're supposed to be in the image, and 1000 ISO from 100 ISO would be 200, 400, 800, so it would be 3 and a bit stops of gain, if you like, but you usually measure gain in decibels. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But ISO invariance, basically, for a camera sensor to be ISO invariant, it makes it basically ISO less. So if we shoot an image at 100 ISO and another image at 3200 ISO, and then we turn the exposure up in post, such as in Lightroom, which we'll look at in a minute, and we turn it up by 5 stops, then the two images will look alike, or will they? Yeah, and the reason I'm putting this video up today is because there's a lot of talk of ISO invariance, but really and truly, very, very few cameras are actually truly ISO invariant. So I don't want you guys to think that your cameras are automatically ISO invariant. You need to test them to see if they are or not. So I don't possess a camera which is ISO invariant, and I don't really want to, because personally I can't see the point. But you know, some people like to think that their cameras are ISO invariant. So what we're going to do is look at two really good high quality cameras that I use. We're going to look at a D800E and a D4, and what we'll do is we'll start off with the D4. So if I look at this image in particular and take it out to a fit to screen view, there's no settings been applied to this whatsoever. This is straight out the camera, straight into Lightroom, so he's got Lightroom's bloody awful contrast background adjustments on it. But you know, I mean, it's what, 3200 ISO, and let's go in and have a look at it. And you know, I mean, there's not a lot wrong with it. So we'll come back to our sort of library grid view, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to process version swap them, actually, because I can't be dealing with this super high contrast. So I'll process version swap all of them, and then I'll put the exposure, the contrast and the blacks all back to 0. So the only change we've got is this subtle inverted S-shaped tone curve, and we've got the contrast relatively under control. So we're looking at this 3200 ISO shot, a 40th of a second f14 shot on the old D4. And if I come back to this other shot, you can see that still shot on the D4, a 40th of a second at f14, but this time at ISO 100. So ISO wise, this is 5 stops underexposed, let's put it like that. 3 dB per stop, if you work on that assumption, which is what I always work to. So this is, if you like, minus 15 dB. Now, the one thing that you can do if your camera is truly ISO invariant is this. And all I need to do is to wang the exposure up by 5 stops. So if I now go and pull my film strip back up and I select these 2 D4 images and we take them back into the library and we go into the contrast and compare view, yes, now on the left, on the right, I should say, on the left, look me, on the right we've got our ISO 3200 image, and on the left we've got our ISO 100 image that's been pushed 5 stops in post inside of Lightroom. It's had 5 stops of exposure added to it. Now this is very reminiscent of something I used to do all the time back in the days of film when I was working for the newspapers, yeah, and we used to use Ilford HP5 film, which was 400 ISO, but what we used to do was expose it using a meter setting of 1600 ISO, and then we used to push process it in Patterson AccuSpeed for 13.5 minutes at, Christ, I can't remember the temperature. I think it was like 21 degrees Celsius, but don't quote me on that, I might have that well wrong. But yeah, so what we used to do is push process, and this is, if you like, digital push processing, and we've push processed by 5 stops to ostensibly bring the 2 images so they look like each other. And when you look at them at a small size, yes, you can see that they do look very much like one another. And if we go and look in the highlights in here in this textured wallpaper that I've got on my wall, wood chip. Don't you just love wood chip paper? Yes, nothing wrong with wood chip. Yeah. Anyway, so you can't see any difference there, and really and truly the push processed image for highlight detail has worked wonderfully. Yes, it has. There's just no difference. However, when we look down in the shadows, oh my dearie me, here is our 3200 ISO shot. Here's our push processed shot, trying to see if the camera, the D4, is actually ISO invariant, and it bloody well isn't, not by a long shot. We've got all sorts of nasty colour artifacts in these. It basically runs from the midtones down into the shadows, where we get image degradation in the fact we've got false colours. We get lots and lots of vertical banding, that is pattern noise, which is always basically something you find in the shadow areas of massively underexposed images. And yet the odd thing is that, you know, the sensor has had the same dose of light for both images, but the ISO settings, as I said before, give the actual AD converter and SNR firmware algorithms instructions on what to do with the signal that they collect from the sensor. And of course, at ISO 100, which is the D4's base ISO, the instructions are do nothing. However, at 3200 ISO, the instructions to the AD converter and SNR firmware inside this D4 are boost everything in a controlled manner, as is set by the algorithms, yeah, boost it by 5 stops, or if you like, plus 15 dB. I think that would be right. Yeah, 15 dB. Some people might say that's 30 dB because some people associate 6 decibels as a one-stop increase. I personally think it's 3, but well, there you go. But that's a whole other story. So, you know, I did make a statement before where I said I can't really grasp the importance of ISO invariance, because if you look at this image on the right, what the hell's wrong with that for 3200 ISO? Absolutely nothing at all. Whereas doing this by trying to turn everything up in post isn't a good idea. And it's always the same message that I teach all the time. Boosting things in post doesn't work. No, it doesn't. I mean, it is a massive fail here because we're trying to boost by 5 stops. Obviously, if we were only boosting by 1 stop, then the artifacting in the terms of false colour, excess noise and pattern noise, wouldn't be anywhere near as extreme, but it's still there. Yeah. So the old adage of capturing light in the camera and making shadows in the darkroom still apply. But anyway, so the D4 is not in any way, shape or form ISO invariant, and with high ISO performance at 3200 ISO, like this image on the right, why on earth would it need to be? The only reason I've put this extra image over here is basically because this one is shot at the correct exposure for 100 ISO. In other words, 0 gain or 0 dB gain, which actually works out at 0.8 of a second at f14. Yeah, and as you can see, we've got I need to swap this image over, which needs to go to there. And so we've got, yes, that's right, so we've got our correctly exposed image at 100 ISO and our correctly exposed image at 3200 ISO. And you tell me, I mean, come on, be fair, Pascal. Why do we need to get obsessed about ISO invariance? There's always going to be some oddball situation that you find yourself in where an ISO invariant sensor would come in handy. And ISO invariant sensors, I think I've not had a chance to test it on the D850, but all reports say that's pretty ISO invariant. How much so, I don't know. But you usually find with the decent tests that you see on YouTube that ISO invariance applies to crop censored cameras, in particular the Micro Four Thirds cameras, the Panasonics and the Olympuses. And yeah, I mean, it's handy to have, but it's not bloody desperate, and it certainly doesn't stop you from taking correctly exposed images. If we go over to look at this image here off the I need to come out of the contrast and compare view, don't I? Here we've got 6400 ISO on the Nikon D800E, and yeah, I mean, the D800E does not do well at high ISOs. It doesn't. End of chat. There are ways of getting around that with multiple exposures and smart object stack blend modes, but I mean, I've already done a video on YouTube a long time ago over that, and I might even do another one, but that's beside the point. The camera itself doesn't do well at super high ISO 6400. As you can see, there's a lot of noise, but ostensibly there's nothing wrong with the image at all apart from noise. Now, if we take this one, this is again 5 stops under, but 5 stops under from 6400 is actually ISO 200. Yeah, and I've had to go there because I can't wang more than 5 stops of exposure onto an image inside of Lightroom. So we'll take this one over into the develop module and we'll wang 5 stops on that. And then what we'll do is we'll select both of those. We'll go back to the library module and we'll go back to a contrast and compare. And so we've got the ISO 200 image over here when it decides to load, and you can see straight away it's noisier than the 6400 native image on the right, and again it's full of these strange colour artifacts which usually manifest themselves in nighttime shots. That's usually when you find them, and they always manifest themselves the same. Smears of cyany magenta or cyany green and brownish magenta, and you can see them here in the actual turned off screen of the old D4 here. But if we have a look at some of the more shadowy detail, or well, no, the mid-tone detail, let's just concentrate on this area here. Ostensibly you can see that there is more noise here than there is here. We've still got some strange colour artifacting going on. And the other thing I want to do is just slip back over to these two images from the D4. And where are we? Am I right here? Yeah, looks like I'm right. And if I go up to where this test target is, on the image that's been turned up, look how prevalent these vertical pattern marks are. It's shocking. Now we'll flip back to the D800E images in a moment, because we'll have a look at this with those as well. But if we look at the ISO 3200 image and we'll look at the histogram, you see that is a good, well distributed histogram. If we switch over to the ramped image, the boosted in post image, yeah, look at the combing we get, especially from the midtones down into the shadows. This combing is a really bad thing to see in a histogram, because combing is indicative of missing tonal values. Yes, it is. And if we go and instead of looking at those, we look at the D800E shots, and here we can see the ramped ISO 200 image, and we can see we've got combing in the histogram there. And if we go back to the native ISO image, you can see we've got no combing in the histogram. So there you go, folks. It's just a little quickie. I'm not saying that ISO invariance doesn't matter. I'm not saying it's not important. The fact that I don't possess a camera which is ISO invariant doesn't stop me from taking pictures. I'm not at all. So please don't get too hung up about it. But if you find yourself on a rainy Sunday afternoon with nothing to do a quick ISO invariance test on your camera bodies, and it's really, really easy to do. And then you can find out just how well you can play with recovering or pushing a little bit if needs be. Both of these cameras, both the D800E and the D4, don't really show any difference if I'm pushing them by a stop and a half. The D4 maybe 2 stops, but as soon as I go beyond 2 stops I start getting artifacting in the images. But of course, you know, if you do not look at your images at 100%, if I come back to a contrast and compare view, if you don't look at your images at 100%, they ostensibly both look epic. So if you're watching somebody else's YouTube video, just make sure that they actually show you the contrast and compare view of the images at 100% or larger, because when you look at them at this small view, there doesn't really appear to be any marked difference, and they both look just as good. So there you go, guys. Hope you got something useful from that, as ever. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to click the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. Click the ringety-tingety bell. Ding ding! That'll let you know when I put another video up. And again, all I can do is just thank all my patrons over on my Patreon channel for actually supporting me and my production of these advert-less advert-less videos over here on my YouTube channel. Okay, guys, like I said, hope you found that useful, and I'll catch you again in the next one. Tooroo!